the deed in lieu of foreclosure is not a magic key that has no counteraction. There is a possibility it could be taken to court and challenged. If they're in default, whatever the process is for your state, send those notices and start the process so that you have the timer working on your side in case you have to go revert back to the standard foreclosure process. I say that nobody's going to do it, but you should know technically that's what needs to happen. When you're doing a deed in lieu of foreclosure, the problem that some attorneys are going to have or other people are going to be that if you go into default, there are defined ways to handle that default. So if a borrower goes into default, the normal process is you send a notice. There's certain time frames. Different states have 30 days, 60 days, 180 days before you send your notices, and you can't start a foreclosure until such and such time. The process must be followed, is what they're saying. Regardless of that process, if you, as a borrower or lender, and the other party, if those two parties agree and sign like a warranty deed or a quitclaim or whatever, and I recommend a warranty deed from the debtor, the person who is defaulting at any time, those two parties can agree, you know what? We would normally have to go through this long process. That's going to cost time and money. But if you and I are on the same page, how about you just deed the house back to me and I forgive the debt and we walk away? Can we do that? And if you agree to do that and they sign a deed, it's done. You didn't have to go through a foreclosure. That's the idea. It's a deed in lieu of foreclosure. So instead of me going through the foreclosure process, you're just going to give the deed back to me. So if you do that at the time that it actually happens, that's 100% valid. I don't care what an attorney says, get out of the way. Also, I'm not an attorney. This is my strong opinion, and I'll argue all day with an attorney about this. If somebody goes into default and the two parties, borrower and lender, decide that this is the path they want to take in lieu of a foreclosure, the borrower that's in default can deed the property back to the lender at that time. 100% valid. The place where they have a problem is if you preemptively deed it back to the person and they have that in hand or it's in storage somewhere. I'm not saying don't do this. I'm not saying it doesn't work or it can't work. I'm saying some people can and will challenge it at some point. In other states, some states more than others, where no, you can't preemptively do that because you have to follow the default process. You send your notice, you do this, you do this. So unless they go into default and then you start the process and then you decide instead of going through the whole process just to do the deed in lieu, I feel like I'm talking in circles, but it's really important. There's a slight distinction between preemptively doing it, and that's invalid to some people, versus you have to actually start the actions of going through default and then decide to do it. Did that answer the question?
No, not really. It did a little bit, but
More
my,
circles, bigger circles.
yeah,
I
more
got to go bigger
bigger
circles.
circles. So that bigger circle, going back to the judicial state that I had an attorney challenging me on this with,
Mhm.
was that they they do not do deeds in lieu because they want the foreclosure process to walk itself out in case there is any equity left in the property for the person who's in default. They're trying to protect that,
And that makes
equity.
sense.
So they
And
don't
I think
allow
that's
you
fair,
to.
which is why they would
So
not allow you to do a preemptive. Like you can't pre-sign one. They're going to say that's invalid because yes, what if the borrower has built up equity? Well, if the borrower has built up equity, let's abstract ourselves or let's separate ourselves from the borrower lender perspective. What if the borrower is going into default and they want to deed it to their cousin who could
right,
catch up that default
sure,
or any of that stuff? They can deed it to whoever they want at any time. As the property owner, I can deed a property to whoever I want, whenever I want. Now, I can deed it subject to an existing debt, any of that stuff. If I deed it to somebody subject to an existing debt that's already in default, then that person either needs to catch that debt up or then go through foreclosure as the owner.
yeah,
So if you change it from the lender being the one that's being deeded to, and say, what is the problem with somebody who's in default deeding the property to somebody else as a
yeah,
resolution for that? Is there any problem with that? Well, no. Okay, so replace random person with lender. And the
right,
borrower and the lender have then agreed at the time. I get it that you're saying, attorney, that it can't be preemptively done and that a process has to be followed. So if it goes into default and those two people at that time decide and sign a new document from the borrower who's defaulting to the lender, regardless of how much equity they have or had, they can do that and forfeit all their equity in order to not have to go through foreclosure. They're allowed to do that. You can't tell them they're not allowed to do that. There's
Okay.
nothing illegal about that. Now, the other side is that, yes, the lender could say, you know what, you have built up some equity. Instead of going through all this stuff, let me give you 5 grand, 10 grand, 25 grand, or seller finance it back to me. But let's get this default handled. Just give me the property back. I'll operate it. We'll figure it out. And I'll give you 5 grand at close of escrow when you deed it back to me. They can do that too. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's
Yeah.
not a requirement that anybody gets, you can walk away from equity at any time. But I understand the desire that from the beginning, you can't plan to skip the process. You have to do it. You have to make the decision at the time of the default.
Right. Which is typical of a lot of things that we see these days, whether it's mutual release or, or a default situation.
Right.
They want to
We,
see the signatures and the dates from that point on that you're agreeing to it, not, oh, well,
yeah,
we a year ago, we decided that we would if we could. Kind
right.
of.
And oh, but I have a power of attorney. Okay. So if you have a power of attorney, which normally you're going to have a power of attorney between a borrower and lender in that case. But let's say you did, as the lender, had power of attorney for your borrower who bought the property. It's not going to be acting as a fiduciary. It's going to be in violation of all the regulations about what a power of attorney is supposed to do to act in your own best interests or to cause them to forfeit or to sign on their behalf to sign the property back over to you unless you have an active, updated instruction from them to do so. I don't care that you had a conversation 6 years ago that said, yes, this is our plan, even if it's
Right.
documented.
Yeah.
I don't care. You can't agree to do something illegal and then enforce it. So if it's illegal, whether or not it's illegal, it can be challenged in court. So if you agree 6 years before to go ahead and do this thing and do a deed in lieu of
Right.
foreclosure or use a power of attorney to take the property back by having them deed
Sure.
it to you through your own signature on their behalf back to you, you can get as creative and complex as you want. But is it a reasonable thing that is enforceable or can they take it to court and challenge it? If they can
Sure.
take it to court, you may get stuck in court and you may still also have to go through the default. So anytime you're using a deed in lieu of foreclosure, I like the idea. I love it. It's a great negotiation chip. Plenty of times it's going to work just fine. However, somebody may talk to their cousin who's an attorney or whatever and be like, oh, you can't do that. Oh, let's just take him to court. So you have to be ready for if we try to do this thing and they challenge it in court, we may either have to defend it in court or go through the default procedure anyway.
Right. I hear you.
And I say that mostly for the watchers of this video. The deed in lieu of foreclosure is not a magic key that has no counteraction. There is a possibility it could be taken to court and challenged. And then in that case, if they're in default, you need to go ahead and start doing your um, progressive notices. Don't stop. Don't skip that process. Start the notices. Hey, you're in default. You're late, 5 days late. Here's you owe a 5% late fee. If you're more than 30 days late, you go into default. Whatever the process is for your state, send those notices and start the process so that you have the timer working on your side in case you have to go revert back to the standard foreclosure process. I say that nobody's going to do it, but you should know technically that's what needs to happen.
Thank you.